Hello and welcome to UpperPen. My name is Dakota, and today we are talking about a book that combines literally everything I've ever loved in the world and just blended it all up into a big ball of awesome. And today we are going to be talking with Nicole Glover about the Starseekers. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be invited on.
For folks who might not have heard yet, what is the Starseekers?
Starseekers is an historical fantasy novel that takes you to 1960s at the height of the space race. It follows Cynthia Rhodes, a arcane engineer at NASA. It gets you some very Hidden Figures vibes in it, which is one of my big inspirations for it. She gets involved, of course, with a murder mystery at NASA, and there's lots of magic flying around. It's particularly drawn on constellation magic. So it's fun. It's a standalone adventure that with all the hijinks and adventure you love in this type of era.
It also has like a murder mystery wrapped in it. So
Hmm.
it's science, it's magic, and it's murder mystery. So it seems like so much is going on. How did you kind of find the story?
I always kind of view mystery as the engine for a plot. Who did it, why, and all the reasons behind it. It's a good engine that gets the plot kind of going. Everything else around it helps. It's not exactly window dressing, but gives character, the historical setting, all the things that are going on that particular year of 1964. Those are things that help me kind of characterize where the plot can go and how I like to see it, and especially with the idea of the location. The location and time and all the time of year is always very important, how I set the story and figure out like what's really going on and what major events I want to avoid, that sort of thing. Because you don't want to write a book where you have some major event going on and you happen to not talk about it. Everyone, or the readers especially, like, why aren't you mentioning it or anticipating that the plot will go that way? So I'm always really keen on finding areas of a particular year where nothing interesting is happening. I think and hope, but unless of course I want to talk about those big important things. And as for the fantasy element, it's something I carefully weave into the story because I had built this world. Because Starseeker is actually fourth in the world I had built. Even though it's standalone, it's building on the world I had started from my very first books, and I get to kind of explore what magic looks like in a more modern era, which has always been fascinating to me because you always see magic as really way back in the time, medieval time or something like Victorian era, but nothing so closer to modern history. Not that's like the history is living history and that sort of thing. So it really fascinates me how I think magic makes sense in the more modern world where there's technology and you think like cars, phones and television, things like that. And but make it a way that says magic isn't like slapped onto things. It makes it so that weave into the history. You get to visit a historical museum centered around magic. You get to see there's like Cynthia is in part of like a runs co-hosts magical education TV show, and you get to see all these little places. I mean, you even get to visit like the most I call the most magical house in the country or something like that. Just showing you how magic appears organically throughout the world.
One of the questions that I have as I'm reading it is what is the cutoff point for who is working magic and who isn't working magic?
There isn't technically any cutoff. God's view that everyone in the world can do magic. Magic is more of a craft, a skill. So it's like with anything with dance, singing, or art, for example. It's all about how much effort you want to put into it to practice to get better, what interest you are in doing it at all, doing it in the first place, and also the access to have be educated in the first place. One of the major themes about the book is about the education piece, and which I kind of logo bit in some of the subplots about how varying access people have, and how that kind of shapes her magic use. For example, the main love interest in the story, Theo, he's an orphan, so he didn't grow up learning magic like how Cynthia did, because Cynthia had the benefit of a big family, and they were big magical practitioners, so they taught her everything I needed to know, plus the old ways. But Theo is an orphan. His parents had died when he was very young, and he grew up where he wasn't really supported education-wise, especially with his magical education. So he kind of learned magic his own way. It makes him more his magic kind of appears more elemental, like just water magic basically. And he's kind of yeah, he learned some stuff later on, but he had a different way of getting to it. And so that's how I kind of view magic in the world. Everyone can do it, but how it just all depends on the access, ability, and interest, and sometimes even natural talent.
I particularly love their TV show that they have together because it really
Yes.
shows the way the magic is kind of taught to kids
Hmm.
and like how uh, I don't know, it brings you into the story in a way that I think is accessible.
Yeah, I loved it. It was one of my favorite parts as the book. It actually was inspired by all the Sesame Streams. When I did the very first one of the drafts I was doing for Starseekers, they had a big anniversary of Sesame Street was coming out. So it's the big 50th anniversary. They're talking about all the history of it. And I kind of learned, oh, there was a black psychologist who was behind Sesame Street, that Sesame Street has a very deep black history because it was, the reason it's set around a city block, city street was to kind of approach the more I guess you can say urban children, people who live in inner cities, who don't have the access to traditional education or have all the access they would have because of, budget cuts and, all this other stuff towards school. So just learning about the richness of Sesame Street, and particularly that the very first human characters on there, they particularly made sure it was a black male and a black female married couple that's as a big role model, basically. So, and from just being inspired by that and also looking at the history of education of television from that time for 50s and 60s and so forth, I got really interested and was like, I just need to put this in the book, basically. And so, of course, it has to be imagination. And that was also really fun to figure out how they would present it and how this would work with particular characters. And it really helped that the characters themselves, Cynthia and Theo, in some ways, they're not only just talented magic, they're really interested in telling people and explaining things, how things go. So it made a really fun subplot to work into the book. And it's also another layer for it is that it gives a reason for all like the, as Cynthia and as well as her friend group kind of come together because they're all her friends or cousins are all kind of connected through this TV show and the TV station. So it made a nice, really organic way to not just add a layer of world building, but also give a way for you meet some of the characters.
One of the things that I find interesting that isn't technically part of the book, I guess it's
Mhm.
part of the book, but your newsletter that came out recently has so many different book recommendations, and they're like things I've never known, and I'm so
Yeah.
mad I didn't know. So
Yeah.
thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
But you kind of work those ideas
Hmm.
of representation and
Hmm.
access into the books. And so why is that important here?
Yeah, so many different layers to that. One, I want to include all these things. So these are the things I've researched. I'm a nerd for all these things. I want to include as much as possible. So it's interesting to me. I want to share it to readers. I want people interested, like, oh, this is real. You can find more information about this. Another layer is that fiction is also a really good way for people to kind of approach different topics and learn about things because people aren't really interested in researching those parts. Just us nerds who like to research and go find things. Sometimes by seeing it in fiction, it will, even if you're not really inclined to learn about history, make you interested. Think of all the movies and television shows, like from anything from Jane Austen to Bridgerton, people who get really fascinated by the Regency era because they enjoyed this media. And so for me, that's kind of the same vibe. I want to be interested and want to learn more. And also, I guess the reputation angle is also important too. There's not many black stories will really have the opportunity to talk about these things. So I also feel like I need to share as much as possible since I have a platform and so to speak, even in just a little fiction story with a bunch of magic and murder going on. It's still a way to, tell people, inform people, make people feel really curious. And that's why I like to talk about the research I do and also share all the little research I stumble across in my search because it's all out there and I want people to find it and enjoy it as much as I do.
It's funny because I was listening to the audiobook version of it, and the narrator is so good. I love her so
Yeah,
much.
Bahni Turpin is like amazing. I was so lucky to get her all the books.
I need her for all the books so I can listen to all of them. Um, but as I was listening, I was like, I wonder if this little piece of tidbit of history is real or
Hmm.
if it was like made up for the story.
Yeah.
So were some of them made up? Were some of them real?
I guess it depends. I mean, a lot of times it more exaggerates certain aspects of things or just took certain things that I just add another layer to magic or stuff. But a lot of secondary characters, for example, were kind of based on real historical people. There's a dancer that comes up pretty prominent in the story. She's largely based on Catherine Durham. He was a famous dancer around this time period. She was also a kind of anthropologist as well, like doing a lot of studies out in Brazil and South America and the Caribbean and so forth. Had a big dance troupe and dance school, which got inspired by the little subplot that snuck in there. Um, yeah, Cynthia's cousin, who's home to TV station, he was largely inspired by a lot of the media moguls. And like in that time period, there was a guy who ran like a station in DC. I think it was Wook TV or something like that. He basically broadcast dance studios and things like that. So it was like I was bringing those things in as well. So it was like, yeah, there's a lot of layers of being real, but also some layers of exaggeration. You know, I did, even though I did study all the manuals about the NASA, because the NASA in the book, I made up a fictional thing. Ainsworth does not exist. We don't have a magical research facility, but it is based on the Goddard Space Flight Center out in Maryland. I actually was able to find the book that came out. I guess it must have been like the late 60s, like right after a few years after the station, the research facility was created and built up and stuff opened and everything like that. So basically, I got a pretty close view of what it looked like when the buildings were made, who was there. It was like all these documents about the history of the building coming together. So I was able to look at the maps and things like that. And even though I looked at all that, I especially looked at all the satellites, and all the really research programs. I will be quite honest. How everything works in Ainsworth probably is not really accurate to NASA, but I try to give a feeling that it is real. Like you see the procedure, you see these like rules and things like that. They get to see like a feel that these are kind of close as possible, which is what we do as writers. We mostly there to give readers a sense that it is true as most as possible, even though it might not necessarily be true. Because the only thing you always remember with, especially with historical fiction, is that we don't really care about the nitty-gritty details. We want to have the big things make sense and be true. The smaller details we can let go, you know, back and forth. Because we really like, you know, do we want to know about people having bad teeth or all the smells of the air and all these things that are in the street back then? We just want as long as the big things make sense and they make sense within the story and everything like that, we can kind of go through the details. And I kind of use that. And I can also keep in mind that I am including magic into the story, so I don't have to worry about everything being 100% true most of the time. Just as long as the big things, as I say, the big things make sense.
One of the funny parts to me is she rides a broom. And for some reason, I just didn't even expect a broom, but it's like a magic book.
Yes. Yeah, it's one I really wanted to add those little witchy elements to it. And I think I had broom writing kind of in throughout all the other books. This is my chance to really go big, literally go big, add this as a big element to the story. And it really worked for Cynthia's character because Cynthia is a character who's kind of very independent. She had kind of grew up as a lone child among a bunch of adults, and now as she gotten older, for reasons that can't explain in the book, she's kind of looking after her younger siblings. But fairly recently, this is kind of she was living her single best life, being a boss at like NASA and all this being an engineer and whatnot. And suddenly, she's looking after her younger sisters. Teenagers who are still really independent, but the broom riding aspect of things kind of shows off. Yeah, she's not quite ready to settle down to this all the other stuff. And it kind of ties alongside of her riding a scooter that mostly she takes her siblings around in. But the broom riding aspect of it was kind of fun to me to show off another layer of her personality. She likes to go fast and hard. She likes to speed around. She likes to do risky things that you might not expect from like a character who's very shy on the outside. And I've also kind of tied it around to like broom ride's kind of similar to bicycle riding in the sense that it's outside certain lanes. There's even like a bike, a broom locker, things like that. There's little tidbits out in the world. But it was really fun to me to incorporate all the different ways she flies the room around. Like she's not just from here to there. She's like flying, sneak around. It's to getting outside museums and all this kind of fun stuff. Even just like levitating high enough to be able to reach something. And so it's kind of fun to me to have the different ways I could show off that and just take a classic icon and just make it my own in a different way.
I loved the combination of it with the sciencey setting, though. Like it was
Yes.
so perfect. Um, one of the sections of the book has um, her and Theo, and they have to go to her sister's school for an issue that pops up.
Yes.
And at one point, she's thinking, "Oh, it would have been so much faster to take the broom,
Yeah.
but like, he's cute." So
That was fun to me because it was a sign showing how she gets a chance to rely on someone else. And so it was like, yeah, like he basically said, "Oh, you need to. I'll take you," and said, "So you won't be flying your room around, so you might hit something or like not. Whether or not she does or not, does it's not really an issue. It's more like she's there as support." Which was, it's one of those fun little small little moments I have in the love plot, basically.
Theo is such a fun character too, because he's not super different than her, but
Mhm.
he brings a lot of different sensibilities to their
Yes.
relationship. He seems to connect more with her sisters, probably
Mhm.
because there's a little distance there.
Mhm.
And he's also an archaeologist, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Yeah. So tell me about Theo.
Yeah, it was a really fun, like you said, it's a really fun character to write and to kind of imagine. 'Cause I love a good love story in these books, and also it's a good way to figure out like how they best work together to solve a mystery and solve everything else in life together, and how they could banter back and forth. And Starseekers really allowed me a chance to really like see like from moving into the early stages of a relationship and how it kind of blooms and blossoms all the back and forth. And there's also a little history in that because I always like to have the little history with between the characters. It's it's like a preference for the writer. But there are little backstories that they kind of met each other when they were like, I guess, teenage age. He'd worked for her great grandparents as like an assistant. And so they got met, but at an age where, it's it's like they're still figuring things out but not quite ready to actually get romantic because she's all set for school and he's like, this is probably my last chance to get out of trouble. I'm working for her great grandparents, this can't happen, but they still, you get a little hint in some of the little interludes, flashbacks where you get to see them interact together. But in the bulk of the plot you get to see that now that everything has been settled, they're in this a different space in life, and like they're both kind of getting involved with mystery as well. Like you get to see them explore, like what's the possibility, and what happens if we do this. And with Theo's dynamic, it just being an archaeologist, being someone who like travels and venture, that's something that's really appealing to Cynthia. It's something she grew up around travelers and things like that. So his spirit of like going places, doing things, being ready and able to go mystery solving with her without much compunction other than, make sure you don't do anything too dangerous without me alongside with them. It's like a very nice and compelling, interesting thing for Cynthia. I think she really appreciates as you see it throughout the book. And I like being able to have someone that can be able to be pretty much as smart as she is, which she won't admit within the text, of course, but I kind of show off. Yeah, he is pretty much as smart as she just kind of focus his interest into different area than she does. Instead of the math, he's more the sciences, the social sciences, the archaeology, all that kind of stuff. And just having the back and forth, having the sense that they're equals, they're able to argue and have disagreements and be able to find things they love, enjoy with each other, and see all those their different fun things as well. And I think really, I guess one of my interesting kind of points with them is that I made the point saying he solves mysteries differently than she does. It's hinted throughout like some of the previous that he's done before, even some of the antics and trouble he gets into when she's not there to keep him out of trouble. So it's really fun and something as a dynamic I really enjoyed doing, just to have me play full fun time with these particular characters.
I love that you allow him to help her realize she can do mysteries
Yes.
and still take care of her sisters because
Mhm.
there's a lot of responsibility that you threw at Cecilia. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that was on purpose. And I think that's something that made a good core for Cynthia's character. That's because she kind of came to life with me, and when I'm in those early drafts, she wasn't. I think she was just like an only child or something like that. But once I added in the siblings, it kind of just added some interesting layer to how she moves about the plot and everything like that. I'd often have like trio pairings because I had two younger sisters myself. So this is kind of, I guess that's reflective of like, how I view siblings. So you see a lot of trio pairings throughout the books and stuff like that. And I think having Cynthia have that responsibility, unexpected responsibility, as us being in the having to remind herself I have to be the older sister at the moment, is something that makes a really interesting, compelling case for her, and also just explains how she moves up her career and everything else in her life. Because some of the things she's done for career-wise, even relationship-wise, had been impacted by looking after her siblings, or even just the stuff with her family dramas. Because I think one of the things that always was in the backdrop of the book was that she was the much an unexpected child in the family, was raised by another parts of her another relations. Like her parents had her very young, her grandparents ended up raising her, and that's something that's really impacted how she kind of views different relationships and how she moves about it. And I was even that's finding her place in things. So yeah, it's one of those it's really one of those really fun things is for me the writer to explore and to add on and espouse and all that fun stuff.
She does, though, get to go like be herself,
Hmm.
which in a lot of other stories, when you have to take care, like you're a sibling and you have to take care of your
Yes.
siblings, they have to sacrifice literally everything.
Hmm.
But she somehow manages to be a NASA scientist or magician.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the benefit of having a really good friend group. Because she has not just she has her cousin who's about pretty much the same age as her, and like Sid who runs a TV station, but he's also there. He's like the number two on like on the call to be called list basically. Intended that he was kind of there from the low points of her life, there and giving the support and like the person she kind of goes to for this additional help. She also has like her best friend Mavis, who's cookbook writer, TV personality, and also there to kind of cook all the meals that Cynthia can't do, basically. That, there's a I think there's mentioned like Mavis was recently divorced, but she's like, she has a weekly dinner with Cynthia and her sisters, and they're kind of checking in that way, and they check in each other on different ways as well. And it's also kind of new to the group is Wallace, who's also Theo's best friend, but also in some ways Cynthia's friends as well, because not only do they bond, they have different things they bond on. He's like, he basically wrote Wallace basically wrote the old all of Theo's old adventures. And so it's like they're kind of bonding on. Like she's like, because Cynthia's reading these old adventures, thinking of this book, because she's also like a Hinton a reader as well. So like she's taking books, giving notes and things like that. So she has basically a good friend group that's there to support her in different ways. That they can you see places where they come together and kind of support whether it's for her or for her siblings.
I love this sense of community that she has around
Hmm.
her, even though sometimes she's a little prickly. Um, and it's very warm and wonderful. And
Hmm.
I I wonder if this is more of like a 1960s thing, because
Hmm.
definitely nowadays we're not as
Hmm.
close, it feels, or maybe it's a African American culture thing
Hmm.
that I just don't know anything about.
And it could make it's a mix of things. It's mostly because it comes down. I wanted to portray the different community things. I think I grew up with a lot of sense of community. How it's not just like your family helping you out. It's some people in the community, your best friends, the people that are aunts and uncles, not technically related by blood, but you call them aunts and uncles anyway because your parents know them, your grandparents know them. You kind of bring and brought into these things. And that's I think that's I think that's something it's interesting that I want to always kind of bring into the book that sense of community. And I think also found family has been a big trope. It's been very popular. You see that a lot across different medias, whether it's books, films, and things like that. The idea of a found family, people who you meet through life that become close in ways because mostly because not because they have to, but because they chose to. I think that's because it's really resonates a lot of people. And lots of stories often open up a really good reason for this to happen, whether it's typically in fantasy, you have the chromatic crew or the scrappy crew of thieves or something like that coming together for a joint mission, or because weird stuff's happening in the world that makes these disparate people kind of come together. And so I think that's a really appealing thing as well as it was really easy to kind of work with. And I think I consciously chose kind of a little bit of like a mix of found family also with some, even though she has some extended family making appearance, because I think because the last one I wrote, Improviser, really leans on her extended family, because Velma's family and the main character in that book, a lot of her family, her immediate family, extended family show up in the book as well. So I wanted to kind of flip the switch for the Starseekers again. Did that. And in some ways, it's kind of going back full circle with the Conductors, which was my first book, which it had a very found family theme as well because these people are literally kind of crafting their family together because they didn't have that and because they're all basically come to Philadelphia where the book is set and they kind of make their own family. So I guess it's all these. I guess it's basically me ruminating different ways of family community kind of shows up to the books and what really interests me is the dynamics for the characters to have. So I like to explore that in different ways.
So you brought up the other books, which I
Yes.
haven't read yet, so
Hmm.
forgive me.
Oh, that's fine.
Um, but they follow this family,
Hmm.
and I guess where did you start in the conductors in time and
Mhm.
place? It sounds
Okay.
like Philadelphia.
Yes. Yeah, the conductors and then the undertakers as well, but they take you to the 1870s. So it's right after the Civil War, a few years after the Civil War. And the main characters in that, Hetty and Benji, are a married couple who used to be underground railroad conductors. He decided we're going to solve murder mysteries together. And so they have a bunch of friend groups. A lot of some of the mysteries take place within their friend groups that we have to kind of solve and have that dynamic of like who's really involved in these things, and there's things they kind of learn about and evolve throughout that as well. That was kind of really fun to explore Philadelphia way back then, just to see what's going on, what could change, what would be different. And I picked the setting for Reconstruction era because I was always really curious about the what ifs of what happened right after the Civil War. Because we always hear in the history books, oh, the Civil War ended, black people were free. And I was like, what did they do then? And so like maybe they didn't solve murder mystery, but they did other things. I got to really explore that. And it was kind of fun, and it kind of explored that kind of setting. And Improvisers kind of jumps ahead into 1930s, which follows Velma, who's the granddaughter of Hetty and Benji. And so you get to see what the 1930s look like. So I picked 1931 as it's like an overlap of like the Prohibition era, early stage of the Great Depression, as well as Jazz Age shenanigans. And Velma's a barnstorming pilot, basically, who was, a former bootlegger and all those a bunch of other things, but she's also a magical investigator. And she gets to travel. You get to see the world. You get to see the U.S. in this book because she travels her plane across the country on the trail to magical artifacts are causing some trouble. And along the way is a newspaper journalist that she has a kind of rivals level dynamic with because he kind of interrupts some of her investigations in the past, and he got involved in this one. And so you get some cameos of these characters in Starseekers that get some hints of these things, of the connectedness of it, even though all the books are kind of standalone. You don't really have to, you don't get spoiled by too much other stuff that happens in the book. It's just fun for me to kind of bring these characters throughout different stages in their life throughout these books and kind of get to see them, get some check in what's going on, and just get some hints of what's going on in the world. 'Cause it's really fascinating. I think really fun to me to be able to follow a family that way because I get to see, oh, this so and so is doing here, or this is something a little bit different here, and how each one can kind of reflect to what's going on in this particular era. And I guess really fun for me was actually putting together this family tree, which shows up in the improviser and Star Seekers at the very front of the book. And that's a really big and important document for me because it helped me figure out like, oh, who's like the right age for this particular point in history, which is always very important because they say writers don't always can do math really well because we just named them things. But it was really fun to think of what the family tree would look like and kind of lead the seeds for like if I wanted to go back a particular point in history, like I have a relative I could like say, oh, this is what could be the main character of this particular book, or I could tell this story with this particular character, or these characters could be supporting characters at this particular point in history. So very important, probably one of the first things I did with the improvisers, and something it was really fun to kind of update it for Starseekers.
Well, so you have these sections where throughout the novel it's pretty linear, but then there are
Yeah.
these little sections where you go back in time and you kind of
Yes.
meet these characters when they're younger.
Yes.
And I was like, these people have got to be in other books now, and I need to know who
Yes.
they are. So, so why include these little tidbits from the
Mhm.
past?
Yeah, the interludes was something I started in the conductor, so all the books have them. And I think it was a way to, I guess, kind of have it a snippet of something I didn't want to just say outright in narrative, but I also didn't want to have a lengthy flashback. And like having at least sectioning off as like a moment, because these aren't really that long. They're probably like half a chapter. Only a couple of them really get too long. They're just basically like a vignette of a certain thing, and that's something that's really important. That's to the plot, something I wanted to really highlight, and something it basically give tidbits to go back and forth, or sometimes to make you want to say go back and see some information later on. And so it was kind of important to me to kind of just to have that particular moment, see in the past, really briefly, like something that gets referenced in the story. And I guess I figure that's part of the signature of this particular series, the interludes plus the opening with the kind of like newspaper magazines kind of clippings sections that kind of basically set the tone for the world. And I think also the interludes allow me just kind of play around with different points of history I can't get to explore in the main plot in the the main timeline of the book because of this restrictions of time. But I also just want to showcase this other thing is going on as well because I like to view books as this is a particular interesting point moment of this character's life. It's not like the end or the beginning. It's the very interesting moment of some dynamic change going on.
And in this case, it feels like the impetus is Theo's coming back
Mm,
into her
yeah.
life.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it'd be like bringing coming back, the thing. Yeah, let's. Like, I want to do romance. Look at this. Let's get on that sort of thing. Let's get back into mystery solving. Let's get back to. Let's get into really what she wants to do. Really do at NASA because even though she's been doing lots of fun things, you get the sense she's not doing the things she exactly wants to do, and all these like different kind of points as well. So it's yeah, so that's the kind of the impetus of the basically around the story, around the murder mystery as well. Like it's always, I always feel like like a murder, I mean, even if they aren't like totally connected sometimes, ne as connected to the victim, I should say, that the murder helps like prod something out of their lives because it's a big dynamic change. So something else that just makes something happens and makes it everything else around them come to life and makes it take stock of things.
one thing I was curious about was, did you name her sister Josephine after Josephine Baker?
Not exactly. I think Josie was a name I always kind of liked. It was really fun. It's fun and
Okay.
peppy. It felt like very 60s. And I think mainly because I grew up loving Josie and Pussycats, the old cartoon.
Yeah.
And so I went into like this rabbit hole looking at like because Josie and Pussycats came from like the Archie comics world basically. And so I was going to venture research some of the characters. I think some of the and actually her friend group, like Valerie and Socks, were actually kind of named off the other Archie characters. Like Valerie took the other name from the other Josephine Pussycat character, but Socks was actually named Socrates. I think it was like a character named Socrates in the Archie comics world. And I was like, oh, that's a really fun name to kind of bring into there. And I think at one point, in one early draft, Josie was actually gonna, because she's a musician, she plays, plays the bass and stuff like that. But I think I was gonna plan actually have her and her friends actually have a band. But I thought that was like too on the nose. But yeah, the thing is, a lot of names, it's when I love naming characters. It's always a mix of like finding names I like that's really fun. It really says a lot about the characters and like, or something, or names that like have some meaning, or just names that I can spell like consistently all the time as well. But sometimes I also have certain patterns. Like with Cynthia's sisters, she basically calls them by their nicknames because she calls them Josie, and like her other one Lizzie. And I even have like the name kind of having the same pattern. They both end with E and that sort of stuff, that fun stuff, showing how they're like a peas in the pod in her eyes. And I think I had a hard time figuring out Lizzie's name because I kept going back and forth of like what kind of name I wanted with it. She actually changed like a few times. I forget some of the names I originally kind of started off with, but it was a fun journey figuring the names for things. And yeah, it was fun. It was even harder with her best friend Mavis because her name had changed a lot too because mostly because then her role in the book had changed a lot as well throughout the different drafts. So a lot of times when I change a character, their name might get changed. Because the fun thing about writing sometimes is when the different drafts, I might end up saying I have too many characters. I need to merge them together because they're playing similar roles. And sometimes I might just I erase one character, give that person the same name, or become a new name because they become a new character. And it's the fun alchemy of writing sometimes. So just figuring out names or just taking inspiration of names I like. A lot of times I'll be out in the street, I'll be watching movies or something like that, saying, "Oh, watching the reading credits and like, oh, that's a really great name. I'll just jot that down." Or last name, I'll jot that down. I might use that, or use it at the starting point. Or sometimes I just might have like just think of a list, a bank of names that I haven't used yet because it doesn't really fit. I think they're like main character names. I can't use these for secondary characters.
So in the book, you actually play with the idea of names quite a bit because
Yes.
Cynthia is also called Luna, but she's also called Cece, but
Mhm.
so she has many names
Yes.
in the book. And so does Theo. He's
Hmm.
accidentally called Leo, and now that's
Yeah.
followed him into his life.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really fun thing for I wanted to really showcase like how the relationships are. Like it's like who's calling her like Luna and who's calling her Cece and also I even showed the moment when she switched from Luna to be CC'd by her family. And that's kind of fun. And it was fun for me to figure kind of play with that. 'Cause I guess as my just talking about names right now, you can tell I'm really interested in names. I'm always reading really carefully, like how even as I refer to the characters in the book. So like in my like when I for the conductors, for example, Hetty and Benjer, I use the more the diminutive nicknames for those characters instead of like the full names. And so some of that's a lot of that's conscious choice of like what names I use and how they address these people. And if you notice it, readers will notice carefully that Theo never calls Cynthia like Cece or anything like that.
Hmm.
And he's like one of the few characters that does that, and that's on purpose. Like even like the rest of the friend group, they'll call her Cece and stuff like that. So it's like a lot of that's on purpose and like showing that Cynthia's grandparents were the ones who were consistently calling her Luna and things like that, showing that's like the name she had growing up, and like Cece is like the name I guess when she became an adult had to be step into that adult role and things like that, or even play with the idea that CC as the initial CC is become like a professional thing might get some confusion because she's doing that on like reports because of the patriarchy and I mean, because she's a woman in science, that sort of thing, and how that plays an effect. And so that like I like playing with that dynamic of things like everything like that. And I guess I should also point out, I put Cynthia on purpose because Cynthia is related to the moon. So another deliver all those different meanings are all playing in pack. And I think also the nickname Luna was also it's also a nod to Sailor Moon because of the literally the Luna, the cat, and there's a couple Sailor Moon nods throughout the book that's deliberately on purpose. So
I'm glad you're as much of a nerd as I am. It makes me happy. It also feels like she does take back her name though too.
mhm,
And there are particular people who will call her particular things,
mhm.
and it feels deliberate.
Yeah.
Um, but Theo, he has a fun relationship with her grandparents or her great grandparents because
Mhm.
her great grandmother called him Leo and he just never corrected her,
Yeah.
which it gets awkward to a point, right? I don't want to tell you that's not the right name.
Yeah, it's fun. I think it's also a hint like to the TV shows. Another tie to like that's why the name he picked for the TV show because they pick like monikers because they don't want to have their real names blast on the TV show. Even though anyone can probably tell it to them, but that's the one way to tie to that relationship. And I guess also shows his direct relationship dynamic with them, showing out he's pretty close to them. It's not like he's not just an employee. He's because he's on a very young age, but he got pretty close to them. So that's important to Cynthia as well because she's very close to her great grandparents as well. So him having a really fun dynamic with them is very important to her. And not saying it's a really key part of the relationship dynamic, but it doesn't hurt.
It does make them feel closer.
Yes.
Um, so in the book, we have a murder, of course.
Yes.
Well, maybe more than one, but you'll have to read.
Yes.
So who the book doesn't focus around solving the murder
Mhm.
necessarily, but it does kind of circle it, right?
Mhm.
So how did you not go full Sherlock, I suppose, all the
Well,
time?
it's a mix of things. It's for one thing, for most part, everyone thinks the big murder that kicks everything off is an accident. So like, there's lots of red tape and things like that. So it's more, and it's thinking of a different sort of mystery, like what's going on, because like, why was he killed? Is it an accident? Was it deliberate? Like, what other forces are in play? And looking at what else might be connected to these things. It was really kind of fun to explore, and also it opens up the it literally opens up the mystery. So not just focusing on NASA, but all the things that get attached to it. Literally explore the explorations, like sea voyages and ships and things like that. So the really big element that comes up a lot is this kind of potion that's like is in charge of like a kind of a magically enchanted fuel. Because I think I read some stuff about like biofuels that they were literally doing around this time period in our world for NASA, exploring with experimental fuels. So thinking like, what if we had magic too and potions and all that kind of fun stuff? It made a good way to add that magical element twist I was looking for. And so that was also a good way to open up the story and some other things around and get some talk about some magical herbs and maybe get some going things and other shenanigans in the background as well because I always like this thing like sometimes the murder is the key thing, but it might be the reason behind the murder and what what's the
Mm.
mechanism behind it that kind of gets really interesting for me. So I like exploring that one because I think it's in a way it's like how mystery itself, the mystery as a genre is kind of evolving.
Mhm.
Yes, there are these classic whodunit stories, but there's also kind of these stories that are kind of exploring the reasons behind it. So like the reasons why, and sometimes even how is it's kind of interesting to me. It's another puzzle to kind of pull together.
It feels like you were much more interested in who or like why or physically
Hmm.
how than who at
Yeah.
times. And maybe that's because of our main character being a
Hmm.
scientist and she's just like, what is wrong with this fuel that
Hmm.
everybody is getting hurt around it
Yeah.
and it's not working?
Hmm. Yeah, because
Uh,
once you figure, I guess for her, it's probably figuring out like why and all that stuff. It makes it easier to point out who's doing it.
yeah.
And I think also because it's also tied to like, who's like the options of like who could have done it. It's like, it could be wide or narrow depending on what lens she's looking at as well. So it's all about, I think also just how everyone else solves different mysteries differently and how she's kind of approaching it from a scientific kind of view of certain things. So I kind of use that way to kind of give that lens to the story.
Do you have any more stories planned in this universe?
We'll see. I mean, I always have a bunch, but we'll see how the winds go with this particular one. I'm glad everyone's been enjoying these different stories. Really fun to kind of pick things out. And I always have like, there's different like decades I would love to dive into for this particular story because it's really fun how how I built this world basically. There's lots of opportunities, and especially since I picked a narrow band of time. There's enough shenanigans around before and after these particular characters.
You
Mhm.
do have another book coming out later this year.
Mhm.
Um, is it Death or Murder by Christmas Cake or
It's
something?
death. Yeah, it's Death by Christmas Cake. It's not connected to any of these books. It's totally it's on its own right now. It's standalone. It's a contemporary story, and it's no magic in it, but plenty of Christmas magic. So to be really brief about it, it follows the main character is a recipe developer for a famous chef whose 50th anniversary of her famous cookbook is coming out soon. And at a party celebrating this cookbook, there's, lots of things happening that it gets disrupted by uh the cookbook author's rival falling ill and potentially murdered, as it turns out. And so the recipe developer is wanting to help clear her boss's name and figure out what's really going on because she's also a true crime podcast lover. So she gets to live out all her best dreams to figure out this mystery. And it's sets all around the Christmas time, so a bunch of like festive cheer alongside the murder mystery solving.
It's not out until November, though, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken,
No,
correct?
yeah, no, just in time as you're getting into the holidays. It's good. It's really weird to talk about it. 'Cause it felt like we just got out the holidays, but it'll be ready to go when November arrives.
But that's like the publishing world. You have to
Yes.
advertise well in advance for people to
Hmm.
know. Um, and with your website, you have a newsletter, of course, and
Yes.
that's how I found out about your upcoming book. So if anybody's interested
Mhm.
in knowing what Nicole's doing, I would join her newsletter.
Yeah. Yeah, a newsletter, my website always I do my best to keep pretty up to date and that's how basically you can find me anywhere. That's the best way that if you're looking for any kind of updates. Because yeah, I have social media accounts as well, but websites will always be there because social media comes and goes.
Well, the other thing I was going to ask is, do you
Mhm.
have a local where you get where people can get signed books?
Yeah, there's a few places. I actually places on my website right now where I have basically because I've been traveling a little bit for the books. I have signed copies. So at least for right as far as I know on the website. So it
Okay.
goes. Yeah, it's right now there I have them on the Starseekers page. So keep it pretty much updated as possible of you can get signed copies. And if you want one, or you can reach out to me directly and I'll make magic happen.
That's so wonderful. Um, so this book has been out for a few months. Do you think people have been receiving it really well?
Yeah, because I've been doing I did an event a couple weeks ago. I met some people who haven't read it but also have read it and lots of really fun glowing things, which is always really nice. Because I think, particularly with this one, is like so many fun things I was able to put into this particular book and do little and take some risks and do things a little bit differently and things like that. So I'm really glad people are really, really getting it and really enjoying it and just being this really, really marveled the idea. Yeah, we have magic at NASA.
I loved it so much. So like you've got me. Um, well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks. It was really great talking with you. We had a really fun time, lots of fun questions as well.
If anybody out there has not yet picked up The Starseekers and or the other books by Nicole Glover, I highly suggest it. It's such a good book, and the audiobook is so perfect.
Yes. All right. You can find them anywhere you find your books, as well as the local library.
Yes. The libraries are always underrated in my opinion, so check it out at your library if you can't afford to buy it. Yeah. Um, and if anybody out there has enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review or a like. Or if you're feeling extra spicy, you can leave a comment and tell me how you feel about the Star Seekers. I always love to hear. But thank you again. And thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Nicole. I hope everybody out there has a lovely, lovely night. Bye.
Bye.